If one day you stand by the sea and see a dark continent appear on the horizon, neither ship nor island, moving slowly yet causing the entire sea to seem bent beneath its weight, you do well to understand this. War may not yet have begun, but your world has already changed. For that is no ordinary warship. It is an American aircraft carrier. It need not declare war upon anyone, nor even fire a single missile. Merely by appearing in nearby waters, it compels a nation's strategic decisions to be rewritten overnight. In modern warfare, the aircraft carrier transcends being a mere weapon. It embodies a form of power, a nation's war potential submerged in the sea, towed wherever required. Conceive of it as a mobile imperial outpost, an airfield upon the waves, a city of steel, a war base poised to overturn the table at any moment. Many would say an aircraft carrier is simply big. But what you should truly fear is not its size, but what it signifies. America needs neither your airfields nor your permission, nor your allies, nor your borders. It need only sail its carrier to the waters off your doorstep, to thrust its air force directly into your skies, and war into your daily existence. It renders distance meaningless, defenses unreliable, and the hope of we can still talk increasingly illusory. You think the heart of modern warfare lies in tanks, missiles, drones? Wrong. The core of modern warfare boils down to one phrase: who can deliver power to the theater of war first and sustain it long enough? The American aircraft carrier is the answer to that question. It is not merely a colossal steel platform. It is the launch button for an entire integrated combat system. Once the carrier is in position, the countdown to war begins. Let us start with the most obvious fact. The dimensions of American carriers transcend the concept of a ship. The Nimitz and Ford classes, with a full load displacement exceeding 100,000 tons and a length surpassing 330 meters, would occupy an entire city block if placed within a town. Their flight decks are as wide as motorways, with aircraft queuing and taxiing like urban traffic. Even more astonishing is the carrier's crew, a permanent complement of around 5,000 personnel. What does 5,000 people signify? This isn't a naval complement, it's a small town, a self-sustaining, long-enduring town at sea. Within its hull lie hospitals, dental clinics, kitchens, bakeries, repair shops, ammunition stores, aviation fuel depots, and a labyrinth of compartments, ventilation, power, and cooling systems. The carrier resembles a vertical industrial city, crammed into a steel shell and afloat on the ocean. You might think it's a warship? No, it's a floating industrial complex. And the most terrifying aspect is that America doesn't build carriers to intimidate. It builds them for practicality, a brutally effective one at that. The carrier is a tool that transforms warfare into a delivery service. War no longer requires lengthy deployments, no longer necessitates establishing land bases, no longer demands transporting vast numbers of troops beforehand. It simply requires moving the carrier to a specific stretch of ocean, and then the war can commence. To grasp the true significance of an aircraft carrier, one must understand a core concept. The carrier itself is not the weapon. It is an airfield, and the real weapons within that airfield are the aircraft. The most terrifying aspect of American carriers is not what the carrier itself can strike, but how many aircraft it can launch, how many times a day. A typical carrier carries 70 to 90 aircraft, not mere decorations, but a fully operational air wing. The F/A-18E/F Super Hornet serves as the mainstay, a multi-role fighter bomber. The F-35C is the stealth era's maritime blade. The EA-18G Growler is an electronic warfare behemoth, specializing in blinding enemy radars and drowning communications in noise. The E-2D Hawkeye serves as an aerial radar fortress, the eyes of the carrier strike group. MH-60 Seahawk helicopters handle anti-submarine warfare, search and rescue, and transport duties. One observes that the aircraft configuration aboard U.S. carriers is not designed for a single decisive strike. but rather to establish and maintain a relentless aerial pressure. When an aircraft carrier enters a theater of operations, it is not preparing for a naval battle. It is preparing to seize air superiority. What does seizing air superiority entail? It means your ground-launched missiles will be suppressed, your radars jammed, your fighter takeoffs intercepted, your fleet locked onto before you can even see the enemy, your air defense network disoriented by electromagnetic noise. You won't even know where the first strike is coming from. The aircraft carrier's method of warfare has never been close in and bombard. Its approach is this. First, it renders you blind. Then, it silences your senses. Next, it leaves you unable to react. Finally, you are left with no choice but to endure the blows. Many perceive the carrier as a brute force champion of frontal assaults, but those who truly understand it would say it resembles a magician of the seas. Through information superiority and air power dominance, it utterly disrupts your combat logic. You think coastlines offer safety? The carrier launches its fighters, and your coastline becomes a mere ornament. You think airfields are crucial? The carrier brings its airfield with it. You think you can stall for time? The carrier maintains its presence at sea. You think you can hide? The Hawkeye early warning aircraft watches you from the skies. You think you can lock onto an aircraft carrier with radar? The Growler jammers will turn your screens to static. The carrier's greatest strength lies in making the enemy uncomfortable from day one, and that discomfort only intensifies. What's more ruthless is that an aircraft carrier never fights alone. What you see is merely the protagonist, but you cannot see the escort legion surrounding it. An American carrier strike group is an entire expeditionary force at sea, with the carrier as its core. The outer perimeter is held by Aegis destroyers and cruisers, their vertical launch systems densely packed like honeycombs, housing anti-aircraft missiles, anti-ballistic missile interceptors, anti-submarine missiles, and cruise missiles. Do you suppose carriers merely deploy aircraft? Their escorts can strike land targets from thousands of kilometers away with Tomahawk cruise missiles. Further out lie attack nuclear submarines, the true specters. Submerged, they operate almost silently. They need not enter your field of vision. Positioned at the right angle, they can suddenly launch torpedoes or missiles, causing your fleets to vanish without a trace. The carrier strike group functions as an integrated system. Surface vessels provide air defense and missile interception. Submarines conduct underwater hunting and ambushes. Aerial assets handle early warning and reconnaissance. Electronic warfare units suppress and jam signals. Carrier-based aircraft seize air superiority, and replenishment ships ensure sustained operations. This entire apparatus meshes together like a colossal maritime gear system. To strike a carrier, you must first penetrate this intricate mechanism. First, you must locate the carrier, then maintain continuous tracking. Your reconnaissance systems must remain undistorted amidst electronic warfare jamming. Your missiles must successfully penetrate dense anti-aircraft defenses, and you must prevent your own launch platforms from being neutralized prematurely by aircraft or submarines. This is why many call the carrier a floating fortress of war. It isn't invincible, but it is exceptionally difficult to destroy, and to do so requires staking your entire system. At this point, you might ask, how exactly does an aircraft carrier launch its fighters? The answer lies in one of its most crucial and brutal systems, the catapult. Though vast, an aircraft carrier's deck remains insufficient for jet fighters. Fully loaded with bombs and fuel, a fighter's takeoff weight approaches its limit, making launch impossible without catapulting. Thus, American carriers employ catapults to fling aircraft skyward like projectiles. The Nimitz-class long employed steam catapults, using high-pressure steam to propel trolleys. The Ford-class upgraded to electromagnetic aircraft launch system, EMALS, accelerating aircraft to takeoff speed like an electromagnetic railgun. Can you imagine? A fighter jet weighing dozens of tons, propelled by a system to take off velocity in mere seconds, then hurtling into the sea breeze. This isn't a takeoff, it's a launch. An aircraft carrier is not an airport, it is a launch silo for aircraft. The significance of catapulting lies not merely in takeoff, but in efficiency. The most critical metric for carrier warfare is sortie rate. How many sorties can be launched in a day? Carriers do not win through a single strike, but by overwhelming the enemy through sustained attacks until collapse. Operations on the carrier deck resemble an assembly line. Aircraft land, wings are folded, they are towed to designated positions, refueled, armed, inspected, taxied, catapulted, and then take off. Each action is governed by strict timings, with every crew member operating with robotic precision. The sight of personnel in distinct colored vests sprinting across the deck is not chaos, but the machinery of war. Yellow signifies dispatch and command. Purple denotes fuel. Red represents ordnance. Green covers aircraft maintenance and catapult operations. Blue signifies towing. White indicates safety and medical. Each color embodies a specific mission. Simultaneously on the deck, jet exhaust plumes, gale force winds, deafening roars, fuel spills, bombs, and the rumbling of steel behemoths in motion. The aircraft carrier deck is rightly counted among the world's most perilous workplaces. For here, the cost of error is never a docked pay, but instant death. Yet American carriers render this danger manageable, relying not on luck, but on process, training, and discipline. What you witness is not merely a vessel, but a war machine that transforms men into cogs. Then comes the carrier's most decisive trump card, nuclear propulsion. Why can American carriers roam the globe and maintain long-term deployments in hotspot regions? Because they burn no oil, they are nuclear-powered. Nuclear propulsion means carriers scarcely require frequent refueling, with a single fuel cycle lasting years. What carriers truly require resupply for is aviation fuel, munitions, provisions, and spare parts. In essence, the greatest strategic advantage of U.S. carriers lies not in speed, but in their presence. They can linger in a theater for extended periods, anchor themselves in crisis zones, and keep adversaries restless for long stretches. This is the psychological pressure of carriers. It forces you to ask each morning, is it still there? What will it do today? Might it suddenly launch an attack? The carrier's presence casts a perpetual shadow over crises. Precisely for this reason, one of the most common tactics for American carriers is not to fire, but to demonstrate their presence. The moment a carrier appears, media coverage intensifies, satellite tracking accelerates, diplomatic calls multiply, and military conferences convene. Rivals are compelled to devote greater resources to surveillance, while allies immediately gain confidence. The carrier serves as a strategic signal, an unspoken threat. Have you noticed? It's a peculiar weapon. The less it fires, the more intimidating it becomes. For it signifies, why have the option to strike, not I am compelled to strike. That is the essence of its power. Now we come to the most authentic and brutal truth. Why does America rely so heavily on carriers? Because they solve the most challenging aspect of U.S. global strategy, projecting power without depending on others. The military capabilities of many nations are fundamentally defensive, guarding borders, airspace, and coastlines. But America is a globally interventionist power that must project force across oceans. To do so, it must solve the base problem. Bases are politically contentious and militarily vulnerable. Allies may deny access, bases may be struck by missiles, or become primary targets. Aircraft carriers are different. Operating in international waters, they face fewer political constraints and possess exceptional mobility. One might even argue that aircraft carriers grant the United States a superpower, the ability to wage war within your borders without needing a foothold within your nation. Thus, the carrier has become the core instrument of American power projection. It can strike land targets, blockade sea lanes, conduct aerial patrols, support ground operations, exert pre-war pressure, and ensure a dignified withdrawal. It serves as both sword and shield, and as a standard-bearer. This value has been demonstrated repeatedly throughout America's wars. During the Gulf War, U.S. forces launched airstrikes jointly from naval carriers and land bases. In Afghanistan, carrier-based aircraft provided sustained air support when forward operating bases were unavailable. And in the Libya operation, carriers and their aircraft enforced the no-fly zone and conducted strike missions. The significance of the aircraft carrier lies in enabling the United States to secure greater air superiority at a lower ground cost. Yet, to assume carriers are invincible would be mistaken. They possess vulnerabilities, which have become increasingly pronounced in modern warfare. They are prohibitively expensive, excessively large, and conspicuous. A single carrier embodies a nation's industrial prowess while serving as the most tempting target. Modern anti-carrier warfare is fundamentally a system hunt, establishing intelligence chains through satellites, drones, reconnaissance aircraft, submarines, and radar stations to pinpoint carrier locations, then attempting to breach carrier strike group defenses via saturation attacks, ballistic missiles, hypersonic weapons, and submarine ambushes. The advent of anti-carrier missiles forces carriers to operate further offshore, while the submarine threat necessitates thicker anti-submarine networks. Hypersonic weapons reduce intercept windows, exponentially increasing air defense burdens. Consequently, future carriers will inevitably evolve. They won't disappear, but will become more complex and networked. The United States is advancing unmanned aerial vehicle (UAV) carrier operations, extending operational ranges through unmanned aerial refueling, and enhancing information-based joint operations. These advancements enable carriers to engage targets from greater distances, reducing the need to enter hazardous zones. Future carriers may function as motherships for UAV swarms, remotely directing drones for reconnaissance, decoys, jamming, and even attacks, thereby enhancing the safety of manned aircraft. The Ford-class's upgraded electrical systems, electromagnetic catapults, advanced radars, and optimized sortie rates all serve a single purpose: enabling aircraft carriers to maintain their dominance in an increasingly perilous world. For the United States, carriers are not merely weapons of choice, but strategic imperatives. They form the cornerstone of America's global presence. One may dislike them, but one cannot ignore them. Finally, we distill everything into a perspective best suited to conclude your video. The true terror of the American carrier lies not in what it can destroy, but in what it can alter. It changes the rules. It transforms oceans from mere transport routes into platforms for warfare. It shifts the skies from belonging to land-based airfields to being dominated by seaborne mobile bases. It blurs a nation's concept of borders, for the carrier can project war beyond them. The carrier is an instrument that makes war more proximate, more accessible, more perpetually imminent. It requires no landing, no occupation. Merely its presence at sea renders each day more arduous for its adversary. One might describe an aircraft carrier as steel or as aircraft, but more accurately, it is an expression of power. It moves slowly across the sea, yet it shifts not just its hull, but the very center of gravity of the international order. So, when you next see an American carrier appear in some stretch of water, do not merely remark on its size. You should recognize that it is not merely a ship, but a declaration. War can now commence, and the choice lies in its hands.